right, good morning, boys and girls. So we are getting to the end of Shooting the Moon. Where we left off last, Jamie just got a word that her brother was missing in Vietnam. So this is what the last paragraph we had was. He meant that my brother was somewhere in Vietnam, but nobody knew exactly where, and nobody knew exactly what he was doing or if he was doing anything at all. He might just be sitting there on a half rotten log in the jungle, a bamboo leaf tickling his ear, just sitting there and waiting for somebody to find him. And that was right after he found out, though, that the private, was not getting shipped off there. So, kind of different points of news that she was getting. All right, here we go. Chapter 16. Every last picture was of the moon. I'd torn out of the colonel's car the second he put it in park in our driveway and bolted back to the rec center. But once I'd gotten into the dark room, I took my time developing the film, working carefully as I could so the negatives would just be perfect. No marks, no scratches, nothing to get in the way of what I wanted to see. I believed those negatives would reveal the truth about TJ, what he'd been doing right before he went missing in action, what he'd been thinking about, some clue that could tell me more where he was about to go. Then maybe somebody could go and get him back. There's a moment in the dark room when you hang your negatives to dry, when you finally see what occurred the moment you open your camera shutter to let in the light and make a picture. I was learning that half the time me and my camera had been looking at different things. I'd focused on Alice's face, but the camera caught the girl behind her combing her hair in the mirror. I took a picture of a tree bending in the wind. My camera found a bird taking flight from a branch. Alice said that the best photographers saw what their cameras saw. They saw the girl in the mirror and the flying bird. What TJ and his camera had seen was the moon, 36 frames of it. When I loaded the negatives into the enlarger and printed the pictures, I discovered that in some of them, wispy clouds were sliding by a full moon's eyes, and in others, crescent moons stood suspended in the night sky like slivers of light, Venus twinkling beneath them. There were quarter moons and waning gibbous moons, every sort of moon there was, sometimes with stars peeking out from the corner of the frames, sometimes framed by circles of light, which later, when I looked up in the encyclopedia, I learned were called penumbras. I printed every one of them over and over. I blew them up until the moons filled the frames. I blew them up until the only thing you could see were millions of tiny grains of light. Somewhere in there was a clue. I felt sure of it. For 2 days, I printed the moons over and over again, my hands shaking, my heart racing. And with every picture I printed, I grew more and more afraid because there were no clues. There was nothing but light and darkness, circles and crescents, a tiny star, a piece of a cloud. When I was done, when I finally couldn't think of one more way to look at TJ's moons, I took them to Cindy's house. I wanted to show them to somebody who wouldn't feel afraid when she saw them. "Is this my birthday present?" she asked me when I handed her the photographs. "Because my birthday's tomorrow, only I'm not having a party. My mom says since TJ's lost, we can only have a family party. Otherwise, it would be bad manners to your family." "You could still have a party if you wanted to," I told her, my voice flat. I felt as though my body had suffered a series of electrical shocks, and now I was empty of feeling. "And then when TJ comes home, you could tell him all about it." Cindy shook her head sadly. "It's too late. My mom already called everyone and told them not to come." "Do you want to hang up the pictures? It would be sort of like decorating for a party." Cindy grabbed a roll of tape from a kitchen drawer and we went upstairs. 36 8 by 10 moons took up a lot of space, and by the time we were done putting them all up on Cindy's walls. Her room was covered. Did you know that some planets have lots and lots of moons? Cindy asked me. We were sitting on her bed like a couple of planets ourselves, orbited by every kind of moon imaginable. I thought my teacher was crazy when she said that to me, but then I asked Daddy, and he said it was true. Satan has at least 28 moons. I think you mean Saturn, and Saturn has moons too, Cindy continued, ignoring me. A bunch. But we only have one. But at least people can go to our moon. The other moons are too far away. I wondered if TJ was looking at the moon right at that very minute, wherever he was. I wondered if he was imagining what it would feel like to rocket through space and land on the moon, to leave your footprints there, to cast a shadow across a crater. It made me feel better to think he was. Not much, but a little better. Now, Private Hollister was sitting on the living room couch when I got home. When he saw me, he stood up and said, I heard about TJ being MIA. Bird told me. Thought I ought to come over and see how you're doing. I shrugged. I didn't even know how to answer. Okay, I guess. We stared at each other for a few minutes, the silence as awkward as a turtle on its back. Fortunately, my mother, an expert hostess, came in and offered Private Hollister some tea, which he accepted. Then he turned to me and said, You want to play some cards? Sure, I answered, nodding, glad to have something to do besides their feeling stupid. He looked to my mother. Ma'am, would you like to play? It'll take your mind off of things now. To my surprise, my mother said yes. So when the colonel walked in the front door about an hour later, there we were, me, my mother, and Private Hollister, eating peanuts and playing gin rummy. Colonel, this is Private Hollister from the rec center, I said, only now he's back at first signal. Private Hollister jumped up and stood at attention. Private Bucky Hollister, sir, pleased to meet you. He saluted sharply. The colonel returned Private Hollister's salute and said, At ease, soldier. What time is it? My mother asked. I haven't done a thing about dinner. She stood up and handed her cards to the colonel. Take my hand, sweetie. I've got a casserole that I've got to get in the oven if we're going to eat by 7. The colonel sat down in my mother's chair, examined his hand, and shook his head. God knows I love that woman, but she collects dead wood worse than a tidal pool. Private Hollister laughed, then stopped abruptly, like maybe he thought laughing was disrespectful to my mom. It's all right to laugh now, son, the colonel said. Mrs. Dexter's tough. She'd have to be married to me all these years now. Yes, sir. Not yes, sir. I'd be tough to be married to you too, Private Hollister stammered. I meant, yes, sir. I'll go ahead and laugh then. Except I didn't want to be rude now. You're fine, son. Don't worry about it. Thank you, sir. Whose turn is it anyway? The colonel asked, because I need to get rid of some of this wood. Private Hollister leaned forward. No, I mean, thank you, sir, for what you did. I know it was you because of you that I didn't get sent to Vietnam. Colonel raised his eyebrows. How do you know that now? My CO told me that you didn't sign my orders. You signed everybody's but mine. He figured it was because of my brother getting killed over there and everything. Want to know the truth? I didn't sign your orders because my daughter asked me not to. If you want to know, well, thank you, sir. Then Private Hollister looked at me and grinned. I'm sure glad I let you win at cards now. I kicked him under the table, but he acted like he didn't notice. And then I looked at the colonel, who nodded at me and winked. And that's when I knew that I'd finally made a good impression on him. Or maybe I'd made a good impression on him all along. I like to think that's true. We played cards all night. Me, Private Hollister, my mother, and the colonel. The moon rising behind us through the window, round and full. We played without keeping score, played just to hear the slap of the cards on the table, the ruffle of the deck being shuffled. And though we didn't know it yet, somewhere in Vietnam, my brother, TJ, was waiting in a prisoner of war camp where he would wait for 2 more years without a camera, without a pen to write us a letter, to let us know where he was or if he was safe. And when he came home, when the war was over, he would look at all the pictures I took of the moon when he was gone, one for every day, even on new moon days when the moon was hung invisible in the sky. And he would stare at them for almost an hour until he finally said, "Now you got all the ones I missed." But we didn't know that quite yet. And that is the end of the story. So, wow, did not think of that coming. So he becomes a prisoner of war, but he's out 2 years later. Wow, did not see that ending coming. All right. All right. Until the next book, boys and girls. All right. Take care.